He aimed at empty sky and hit a plane he never saw. The crew thought he'd lost it. The enemy was still miles out, specks of black against the white glare of the clouds. No tracer, no contact, no sound, just the distant hum of approaching engines. But Sergeant Harold Red Daniels didn't wait for sight. He trusted the numbers. He swung his twin .50 caliber Brownings up, not toward the fighters, but toward a patch of sky 10 degrees above them. Nothing but air. He squeezed the trigger. For a moment it looked insane, streams of bullets climbing into emptiness. Then the sky itself split. A German Bf-109 dove straight into the invisible wall of lead. It disintegrated mid-turn, fire curling through its wings before vanishing into the clouds. The waist gunners cheered. Daniels didn't. He just said, "They were already there. They just hadn't arrived yet." It was 1943, high above Bremen. The 100th Bomb Group, the Bloody 100th, was flying its 15th mission. The Luftwaffe was closing fast. 30 fighters against 20 B-17s. Every gunner in the formation was firing by instinct. Aim, track, fire, and missing. Except Daniels. He aimed at nothing and kept hitting everything. Later, the crew would swear he had some supernatural sense, some invisible sight. But it wasn't magic. It was math. The hard, ugly math of airspeed, distance, and delay. At 400 miles per hour, the enemy crossed 600 feet every second. A .50 caliber round took 0.4 of a second to travel that far. By the time your brain told your hands to fire, the target had already moved. The difference between life and death was 0.4 of a second. Daniels had learned to aim into the future. And that day, in the thin, freezing air over Germany, the sky filled with invisible equations, bullets drawing arcs where men hadn't yet arrived. When they landed, his gun barrels were white-hot and warped. His oxygen mask was frozen to his face. Someone asked him how he knew where to shoot. He smiled faintly. "You don't shoot at what's there. You shoot at what's coming." Every new gunner came to the war believing the same thing. Aim where you see the enemy, and pull the trigger. It was simple, human, and completely wrong. At 25,000 feet, instinct was suicide. The B-17 Flying Fortress moved at 180 miles per hour. The German fighters attacking it closed in at more than twice that speed. Between them, bullets hung in the air for less than half a second. But in that half second, the entire world shifted. What your eyes saw was already the past. The human brain couldn't process it fast enough. It wasn't built for three-dimensional motion at hundreds of miles per hour. So, early in the air war, American gunners did what felt natural. They aimed straight at the aircraft, charging them. Their tracers streaked across the sky like glowing threads, beautiful and useless. Hit rates hovered around 15%. Then came the shock of loss. Bomb groups returning with empty tail sections, blood frozen to aluminum floors. Crews realized that instinct, bravery, and even perfect reflexes weren't enough. They needed a new logic, something colder than courage. So engineers and mathematicians at Eglin Field started to study the problem. They filmed mock dogfights and charted bullet paths like equations. They found that by the time a gunner reacted to what he saw, the target had already moved 250 feet out of alignment. The solution was counterintuitive. Don't shoot at what's there. Shoot at where it will be. It became known as lead fire. In training, instructors told rookies to fire into empty sky, to trust the angles, not their eyes. Many refused at first. It felt insane. But slowly they saw the pattern. Bullets weren't chasing targets anymore. They were meeting them. As gunners learned the rhythm of the sky, the results began to change. Missions, once ending in massacre, started to come home intact. By spring 1943, hit probability had jumped from 18 to 60%. Not because of new guns or better planes, but because men had learned to abandon instinct. They stopped reacting to the present. They started predicting the future. And in that strange evolution, the B-17 became less like a plane and more like a machine that could see ahead of time. The Boeing B-17 wasn't just an airplane. It was a city of aluminum that learned to defend itself. Each fortress carried 10 men and 13 Browning 50 caliber guns. Nose, tail, waist, top, belly. Every direction had steel and fire. But one bomber alone was still vulnerable. Against German fighters, it was like a single fortress surrounded by a sea of sharks. The true weapon wasn't the plane, it was the formation. By 1943, the 8th Air Force perfected a pattern called the combat box. 12 B-17s flew in staggered levels, wings overlapping like scales. Each gunner protected not just his own plane, but the next one beside him. Every gap in one field of fire was filled by another. It wasn't instinct, it was geometry at 25,000 feet. The combat box turned chaos into structure. Every gunner had an assigned quadrant: 10 o'clock high, 6 o'clock low, 3 o'clock flat. If everyone followed the math, no enemy could penetrate without crossing at least 3 guns' arcs. But the system had a flaw. The gunners still aimed like riflemen, at what they could see. Against fighters closing head-on at 400 miles, that was suicide. On early missions, the Luftwaffe exploited it perfectly. Bf-109s dove straight through the formation, too fast to track. Gunners fired instinctively and always a second too late. Dozens of fortresses went down. Crews started calling the raids aluminum rain. It wasn't until the bombers over Bremen and men like Harold "Red" Daniels that the pattern began to change. During debriefings, Daniels described his shots, how he fired before the enemy appeared. Commanders at first dismissed it as luck, but then gun camera footage proved it. His tracers intersected enemy flight paths at perfect angles. The B-17's defense suddenly made sense. Each gunner wasn't fighting his own battle there. He was one node in a predictive grid. When a fighter entered that grid, it was already flying into bullets. Mathematicians at Wright Field mapped it. The average Luftwaffe fighter spent 2.8 seconds inside a B-17 formation's effective kill zone. A gunner had to make a decision faster than the human brain could process sight. So they stopped relying on sight. They relied on timing. The flying fortress wasn't powerful because it had 13 guns. It was powerful because those guns worked like a single equation, each man solving his fraction of survival. From the ground, the formation looked like symmetry. From the cockpit of a German fighter, it looked like death waiting in a pattern. Every airman who stepped into a B-17 learned one brutal truth. Physics didn't care about courage. At 25,000 feet, the enemy came fast. Faster than a heartbeat, faster than fear. A Bf-109 diving from above closed distance at nearly 400 miles per hour, about 600 feet per second. A 50 caliber bullet, leaving the barrel at 2,900 feet per second, took just under 0.4 seconds to reach that distance. In those 0.4 seconds, the fighter had already moved 250 feet. That meant every gunner who aimed at a target was already too late to. The instructors at Eglin Field turned that into a mantra. By the time you see him, he's already gone. The math was merciless. The human eye could track about 12 frames of motion per second, but a closing enemy crossed a gunner's field of vision in less than half a second. Reflex was useless. The only answer was prediction. That's when the doctrine of lead fire became gospel. Instead of chasing the fighter's silhouette, gunners were taught to fire ahead of it, at the patch of sky where the aircraft would arrive by the time the bullets reached it. To most rookies, it felt like madness. "Why waste ammo shooting at nothing?" one trainee asked. "Because nothing is where the enemy lives," the instructor replied. The system was perfected through trial and data. At Wright Field, technicians filmed hundreds of mock engagements. They measured angles, speeds, bullet drift. They built mechanical predictors, analog computers that turned instinct into geometry. They found that aiming 10 degrees ahead at 300 yards yielded the best intercept rate. The result? Accuracy improved by 63%. But the most remarkable finding wasn't technical. It was psychological. Once gunners accepted that their eyes were lying, something changed. They stopped panicking. They started trusting rhythm, timing, intuition sharpened by numbers. Harold Red Daniels once explained it best. If you wait to see fear, you're already dead. You've got to shoot before fear finds you. By mid-1943, bomber groups were returning home with fewer losses and fewer wasted rounds. The math had become instinct. The sky had become predictable. And somewhere between physics and faith, ordinary men learned how to kill with precision by aiming into the void. It wasn't luck. It was the science of seconds. July 25, 1943. The sky over Germany was the color of metal. The 100th Bomb Group, the Bloody 100th, was flying toward Bremen, one of the most heavily defended industrial targets in the Reich. 200 miles from the North Sea coast, radar alarms screamed across German bases. Fighters scrambled, black specks climbing fast to intercept the Silver Fortress formation. In the ball turret of B-17, Heaven Sent, Sergeant Harold Red Daniels locked his harness. The world spun beneath him, farmland, rivers, clouds. His turret turned like the barrel of a watch. At 10 o'clock high, sunlight flashed off a formation of Messerschmitts. They were coming head-on. The old rule said, aim for the nose. Daniels ignored it. He adjusted his guns 5 degrees forward, 3 degrees high. Empty sky. Nothing there. "Red, what the hell are you shooting at?" the waist gunner yelled over the intercom. Daniels didn't answer. He fired a 2-second burst. The tracers arced out, rising into the bright void, and then, impossibly, connected. A Bf-109 dove straight through his invisible wall of lead. Its engine exploded in a flash of orange. The rest of the formation scattered. "Hit confirmed," the tail gunner shouted, disbelief in his voice. Another fighter swung around. Daniels tracked it, then shifted his sights a full body length ahead of its nose. Again, the space looked empty. He fired. The Messerschmitt flew directly into the stream and disintegrated. For the first time in weeks, the crew of Heaven Sent wasn't the hunted. They were the ones dictating the sky. Around them, other gunners began copying Daniels' rhythm. "Lead your fire," someone called over the radio. "Don't chase them. Meet them." Within minutes, the formation transformed. Instead of panicked bursts and wasted ammo, the air filled with invisible grids of fire. The German fighters dove into geometry and never came out. In the chaos, Daniels barely noticed the flak tearing around them. His oxygen hose froze solid. His gloves were stiff with frost. But his hands stayed steady on the triggers. Another attack wave, FW-190s this time, low and fast. Daniels didn't wait for the angle. He calculated the speed, the time, the lag, and fired before they even reached the formation. His tracers curved upward, invisible to the enemy until it was too late. 2 more kills confirmed. When they finally dropped their bombs and turned home, 6 B-17s were gone, but 20 German fighters had been shot down. In the debrief, commanders asked Daniels what changed. He shrugged. "I stopped aiming at what I feared. I aimed at what I knew." That mission became legend, not because of one man's skill, but because of the math behind his madness. From that day forward, the phrase "aim for nothing" spread through the 8th Air Force. It wasn't defeatist, it was prophetic, because up there at 25,000 feet, the only way to survive was to hit what hadn't happened yet. After Bremen, the numbers began to change, and so did the men. The 8th Air Force's analysts noticed something strange in the mission reports. Ammunition use was dropping, but kill ratios were climbing. Crews were firing less and hitting more. The brass called it statistical anomaly. The crews called it seeing ahead. Within weeks, the concept of predictive zone fire became official doctrine. It wasn't just a tactic. It was a mental shift. The gunners who survived longest no longer thought like hunters. They thought like engineers. Each had his own invisible map of the sky. an internal grid of angles, speeds, and probable paths. When a fighter appeared, their eyes no longer followed it. Their minds already knew where it would be. Sergeant Daniels described it best. At first you fight the plane, then you fight the pilot, then you fight the math, and when you finally trust the math, the fear goes away. The B-17 wasn't evolving mechanically, it was evolving psychologically. When formations tightened and men stopped wasting rounds, survival rates jumped. In late 1943, missions that once lost a quarter of their aircraft began returning with nearly all intact, and the change ran deeper than skill. It was an emotional collapse, the death of reflex. The war had trained young men to shoot at movement, to trust adrenaline. Now the fortress demanded the opposite: stillness, calculation, patience. For a gunner, that was hell. To sit inside a vibrating machine of death surrounded by smoke and noise and aim calmly into emptiness. But it worked. Each flight became a test of control, each trigger pull a mathematical prayer. By the end of 1943, Luftwaffe Fighter Command reported a doubling of aircraft losses over fortress formations, without understanding why. They thought the Americans had invented new guns. They hadn't. They'd invented a new way to think. In the skies above Europe, reflex had finally died, and prediction had taken its place. Florida, 1943. Eglin Field. The training hangar smelled of cordite and oil. Rows of gunnery simulators faced a white wall, curved like the inside of a dome. On it, shadows of German fighters flashed and vanished in seconds. Each student gunner had a mock turret, a replica of the B-17's 50-caliber system. The simulator projected moving silhouettes at random speeds and angles. The rule was simple. You had 1 second to react. Most rookies failed immediately. They tracked what they saw, not where it was going. Their tracers lagged behind, always a heartbeat too late. Then the instructors rewound the film. "Look again," one said. "That's not your target. That's where it was." The exercise became mechanical repetition. Day after day, men were taught to disconnect from instinct. The sky was no longer a scene. It was an equation. Harold "Red" Daniels, newly assigned as a training assistant after his first missions, stood beside the gunners and watched their frustration. He spoke softly. "Stop chasing ghosts. See the air ahead of the wings. That's where death hides." He reached over, adjusted a student's aim by an inch, a nothing adjustment, and pressed the trigger. The silhouette shattered. That moment, the entire room went quiet. The realization hit. The trick wasn't speed. It was prediction. Soon, instructors began calling it the geometry of survival. Each turret had a different math. Tail guns needed high-angle compensation. Ball turrets demanded parabolic projection. Top turrets relied on lateral offset. It was physics disguised as intuition. Daniels began sketching diagrams on scrap paper. Circles intersecting arcs, labeled with angles and distances. He showed that every attack path had a zone of arrival, a narrow cone in which every enemy fighter must appear. If you aimed for that cone, you didn't need reflexes, you needed rhythm. Within weeks, trainees began to change. Their movement slowed, their trigger discipline steadied. Fear gave way to calculation. For the first time, human reaction was syncing with mechanical prediction. One instructor wrote in his report, "These boys are learning to see seconds ahead. Their eyes move slower, but their minds move faster." By the time these gunners reached England, they weren't just soldiers. They were walking algorithms in flight jackets. Daniels called it the strangest kind of peace. In the turret, everything outside dies. There's no noise, no panic, just math and the shape of what's about to die. In that silence between seconds, a new kind of warfare was born. One where victory belonged not to the fastest hands, but to the calmest mind. October 14th, 1943. The second raid on Schweinfurt. the mission that every man in the 8th Air Force feared. Hundreds of B-17s lifted off from England before dawn, silver wings vanishing into cloud. Their target, Germany's ball-bearing factories, the beating heart of its war machine. By noon, they were flying through hell. The Luftwaffe threw everything it had left, FW-190s from above, BF-110s from below, Me-109s head-on. Wave after wave of fighters tore through the formation. Inside the fortress heaven sent, Harold Red Daniels' world became smoke and motion. Flak bursts rocked the plane, peppering the fuselage with holes. His intercom crackled with screams. The top turret jammed. The tail gun was silent. And still he fired. He couldn't see the enemy anymore, and only flashes, shadows darting through clouds. So he relied on the one thing left. The geometry burned into his brain. He aimed at nothing. The tracers vanished into gray air. Seconds later, a German fighter appeared right where he'd aimed, already flying through his bullets. The FW-190 disintegrated. His oxygen mask froze. The feed lines in his turret cracked open. The air turned thin, and blackness crept at the edges of his vision. He kept firing. Below him, another B-17 exploded. The formation tightened, closing ranks around the gaps left by the dead. Daniels kept counting angles, adjusting by memory. The world slowed, or maybe he did. Every burst of fire was a calculation made in exhaustion. Two fighters came in from opposite sides, crossing paths. He didn't aim for either. He aimed for the space between them. When they converged, his tracers were already there. Both planes went down. When the oxygen finally failed, he slumped forward, still gripping the triggers. His last thought was a strange one. The sky looked calm again. When the fortress landed hours later, half its crew was unconscious from frostbite and hypoxia. Daniels had passed out mid-battle. The flight engineer found him still holding the controls, hands locked in rigor. His gun barrels were white from heat. His last burst had scored 2 confirmed kills. In the debrief, the surviving officers tried to make sense of it. How the hell did he keep hitting them blind? The answer was quiet, almost reverent. He didn't aim blind, one man said. He aimed by memory. That mission became legend. The day the 100th Bomb Group lost 60 bombers, but proved something the numbers had always known. You could take a man's sight, his oxygen, even his breath, but not the rhythm of his training. By the time the sun set over Schweinfurt, the sky was littered with burning planes. Some were German, some were American. All were victims of prediction. In the end, the B-17 didn't win the air war because it was invincible. It won because its gunners learned to fight what they couldn't see. The lesson was brutal. Vision lies, math doesn't. By late 1943, bomber crews across the 8th Air Force had stopped aiming by sight altogether. The new manuals no longer spoke about reflex or courage. They spoke about lead angles, closure rates, and predictive cones. What began as instinct became algorithm. The sky was no longer chaos. It was a problem to be solved, second by second, burst by burst. And the solution was invisible. Sergeant Harold Red Daniels never called himself a hero. He didn't have to. His training had made him part of something larger, a human machine calculating death in motion. He once said, "We didn't fight the enemy's planes. We fought their future." By trusting numbers over nerves, the B-17 crews rewrote aerial combat. Luftwaffe analysts later discovered that after predictive fire was introduced, fighter loss rates doubled, while American ammunition expenditure dropped by 37%. It wasn't magic. It was the math of the invisible. A weapon no radar could jam, no armor could block, no pilot could outfly. For the first time in human history, victory came not from reaction, but prediction. Those who survived learned an unsettling truth. You could only control the sky by letting go of what you could see. When Daniels was asked years later what it felt like, he paused and smiled. Like shooting into tomorrow. and hoping you're still there when it arrives. In the cold air over Europe, that was enough. The fortress didn't just defend itself. It taught men to see seconds ahead of death. When the war ended, the sky fell silent. But the math remained. Thousands of airmen went home believing they'd simply been lucky. They hadn't. They had turned intuition into geometry and fear into precision. The B-17's legend wasn't built on armor or guns. It was built on prediction. Men like Harold Red Daniels didn't just aim at empty sky. They aimed at the future, and for a moment, they mastered it. That was the quiet victory. The one written not in medals, but in equations drawn in gun smoke. Because in the end, foresight was the deadliest weapon of the war.